Welcome, friend. Tonight, on Sleep Stories, Restless Minds, we follow a quiet traveler named Eliot as he walks a snow-covered road that winds through forgotten towns, each one revealing a gentle reflection of who he might have been. Some towns are full of music, some are hushed by time, and at the very end of the road he'll find the mirror, not to look at his reflection, but to understand the many lives he's gently carried. Let your thoughts slow. Let the snow settle, and walk with us a while. Let's begin. The Mirror at the End of the Road. Part 1, A Road That Remembers Snow. Eliot walked without hurry. The snow beneath his boots was soft, fresh, untouched, yet already familiar, as though it remembered his footsteps before they were placed. The road wound ahead of him in a slow curve, its edges lined with bare trees and gentle snowdrifts. There were no signs, no destination, only the feeling that, somewhere up ahead, there was a place waiting that knew his name. His coat was thick, his scarf well worn. He carried no map, just a small book tucked into his pocket, a book with no title and pages that remained blank, no matter how often he looked. Behind him, the world faded softly, not erased, just quiet. He passed a wooden bench buried in snow, its back carved with the words, "Sit if you're uncertain." He didn't stop. He wasn't certain, but something in him had begun to trust the way uncertainty felt. The trees thinned as he walked. The wind circled gently, never biting, only brushing his shoulder like an old friend, reminding him it was still there. Up ahead, a figure stood by the side of the road. Not waiting, simply being. The figure wore a long cloak, and their hands were tucked into the folds of a bag full of bells, small silver ones that jingled softly with each shift in the wind. Around their feet were half-buried footprints that led nowhere. As Eliot approached, the figure turned without surprise. "You're early," they said, voice like soft wool. "Or maybe the road is late." Eliot nodded. "That sounds about right." The figure held out a single bell. It was cold to the touch, but not unpleasant. "For your silence," they said. He didn't ask what it meant. He simply took it and tied it to his coat with a bit of loose thread. The figure smiled and returned to stillness. Eliot kept walking, and somewhere behind him the bell rang once, clear and bright, before falling quiet again. The snow deepened. The road kept winding. And the mirror waited far ahead, behind the next hill, or maybe the next dream. Part 2, The Town with Too Many Windows. The snow shifted as Eliot walked, no longer just a blanket over the world, but something finer, almost thoughtful. It gathered along the path in loops and whorls, as if the wind had been drawing idle shapes while waiting for someone to pass. The trees gave way to stone walls, softened by years of frost. And then quite suddenly he was in a town. It had no name on any sign, but the buildings were neat, square, and built closely together, each one 2 stories tall, and every single one lined with windows. Dozens of them. Too many, really. Windows in places no windows needed to be, above door frames, tucked into corners, stacked one atop another. Some were shuttered, some were glowing, some had curtains pulled halfway across them as though someone had just looked away. Eliot stepped carefully down the cobbled lane. It was quiet, not abandoned, just held still, like a town that had taken a deep breath and chosen not to exhale. In one of the windows, he caught a glimpse of movement. A figure, just for a moment. It was him, but younger. Or maybe not. The Eliot in the window held a book and looked up only once before fading into the curtains like mist. Eliot kept walking. Each window reflected something different, some impossible, some forgotten, a version of himself laughing with people he never met. A small shop with his name above the door, Eliot's Ink Thread. A child at a windowsill watching the snow fall with a familiar, quiet curiosity. None of them were frightening, just gentle. Possibilities wrapped in frost. At the center of the town stood a square fountain, long frozen over. In its basin lay a collection of gloves, all mismatched, all gently resting in a shallow bowl of snow. A wooden sign leaned against the base. "You may leave what no longer fits." Eliot reached into his pocket. The bell tied to his coat rang softly once. He withdrew a small piece of folded paper, a note he hadn't opened in years. It had no address, no salutation, just the feeling of unfinished. He placed it among the gloves and stepped back. The snow swirled, not in wind but in agreement. As he left the town, the windows behind him grew dim. Not sad, just still. And the road opened once more into white. Part 3, the inn with only one room. The snowfall returned in soft spirals, brushing against Eliot's coat like the pages of a dream still being written. The road bent gently, not in haste, but in suggestion, as if asking, "Are you ready for the next thing?" He was. The light changed subtly, not darker, just deeper. And then he saw it a small inn tucked between two ancient snow-buried trees. A sign above the door, carved in curling script, read, "The once and future stay." Below that, in smaller lettering, "One room, always ready?" Eliot opened the door and stepped into warmth. The inn was quiet, one room only as promised. A fire crackled in a hearth shaped like an open hand. A kettle murmured gently on a side table. There was a single bed, blanketed, inviting, and a journal resting on the pillow. He didn't see a keeper, but something in the room had clearly been expecting him. He removed his coat, the bell on its collar making one last faint chime as he hung it by the door. Then he crossed to the bed and picked up the journal. His name was written on the cover. Inside there were entries, not in his handwriting, but familiar just the same. Moments from his journey so far. The sound of the bell given by the figure on the road. The warmth of a window in the town with too many windows. The decision to leave something behind. Each entry ended with a line in bold ink. "You were here?" He added nothing. The book closed itself with a soft content. Eliot sat near the fire. A small hour passed. Or perhaps it was a memory of one. Eventually he rose and retrieved his coat. The bell was gone now, replaced by a small silver thread woven into the fabric. He smiled, not surprised. Outside, the snow had lightened. The road waited patiently. He stepped into his boots and back into the evening, the inn door closing quietly behind him. The building was gone by the time he looked over his shoulder, but the warmth lingered in his sleeves. Part 4, the village that doesn't speak. As Eliot moved forward, the snowfall grew softer, not fainter, but more intentional. Each flake seemed to fall with care, as if being placed by hand. The road narrowed through a grove of snow-heavy trees before widening again into a quiet village. Small cottages dotted the slope. Smoke rose from chimneys, curling into the dusk like script on a fading page. Warm yellow light poured from some windows, but none of the doors opened. No one waved. No one called out. And yet Eliot did not feel alone. At the edge of the village stood a sign, half buried in snow, "The village that doesn't speak." Words are resting here. Please be kind. He stepped carefully between the houses, the snow crunching faintly underfoot. Footprints crossed his path, small, large, crooked, straight, none recent, but none erased either. A silence deeper than stillness wrapped the village. But it was not cold. It was resting. In the center stood a small square with a bench carved from smooth cedar and a fountain frozen mid-splash. A plaque at the base read, "When words are too heavy, sit. We will hold them." Eliot sat. He thought about all the things he hadn't said in his life. To the people he missed. To the people he'd never meet. To himself. They gathered around him now, not loud, not demanding, just present. Some words had been tucked away for years. Others were new, only recently swallowed in moments when the air had grown too thick to speak. He didn't say anything aloud, but still the bench seemed to understand. A gentle warmth rose through it, like old wood soaked with kindness. He closed his eyes briefly, letting the silence do its quiet work. When he opened them again, he noticed something in the snow beside him, a stone with an etching on it, an open hand and a thread winding through the fingers. He picked it up. No explanation needed. It was for remembering what couldn't be said. He slipped the stone into his coat pocket. The houses around the square flickered once with soft light, and the road beyond the village began to reappear, as if gently recalling its shape. Eliot rose and walked on with the stone resting gently against his side. Part 5, The Clocksmith's Garden. The road curled slowly away from the silent village and into a stretch of forest that smelled faintly of pine and frost. The trees here were thinner, spaced evenly like careful stitches, and through them the twilight glowed a soft, silvery blue. Ahead, Eliot saw a wrought iron gate. It stood open. Beyond it lay a garden, strange in the snow, yet untouched by time. The paths were clean. The hedges, though dusted in white, had been trimmed recently, and scattered throughout the garden were clocks. Dozens of them, big ones, small ones, pocket-sized, tower-shaped, wall-mounted, tree-hung. Some ticked gently. Some stood still. Above the archway at the garden's edge, a wooden plaque read, "The clocksmith works only in pause." Eliot stepped inside. The snow muffled everything except the steady tick-tick of a single large clock nestled at the center of the garden in a glass dome. It ticked slowly, rhythmically, more like breathing than machinery. A figure stood beside it, back turned, winding a delicate brass key into the clock's side. The figure turned at Eliot's approach, a tall, quiet man with eyes that shimmered faintly like starlight through frost. He nodded, not surprised. No words. The clocksmith gestured to a smaller clock nearby, an elegant piece with a wooden face and a single silver hand. Eliot leaned closer. Instead of numbers, the face was marked with words. Before, almost, during, after, again. The hand pointed squarely at almost. The clocksmith handed Eliot a small brush and motioned to the snow gathering along the garden path. Eliot understood. He crouched and gently brushed the snow away from one of the smaller clocks buried beneath a hedge. Its face lit up as the snow cleared, showing the word "now." Not a command, just a note. He smiled. The clocksmith nodded once approvingly and returned to his dome. Eliot walked a few loops through the garden, brushing off 3 more clocks as he went, each one showing a different moment, each one glowing briefly before dimming again. He didn't take anything. But when he reached the gate again, he found a small watch tucked into the fold of his scarf. It had no hands, no face, just the faint hum of time remembered. He pressed it to his chest. The ticking stopped for just a moment, then started again, slower, easier, and the road beyond opened, waiting. Part 6, The Tea Merchant by the Frozen River. The path dipped low and followed the bend of a frozen river, its surface smooth and glassy beneath a whisper of snow. On either side, willows draped their frost-heavy branches over the ice like curtains drawn partway across a dream. Eliot walked slowly, his breath rising in small puffs, his boots leaving brief imprints before the snow softly filled them in again. Just ahead, a canvas tent stood pitched by the river's edge. Smoke rose from a small iron chimney, and lanterns, round and dim, hung from a crossbeam, swaying slightly with the breeze. A wooden sign beside the path read, "Steeped memories, 1 cup, 1 moment." He stepped inside. The air was warm and smelled of ginger, mint, lavender, and something older, like cedar soaked in years. Inside, shelves of tiny glass jars lined the walls, each filled with snow-colored herbs and dried petals. A small table sat in the center, a single teacup already waiting. The tea merchant stood behind the table, wrapped in a robe the color of storm clouds. Their hair was white and woven with threads of silver ribbon. They smiled at Eliot, kind and wordless. A card on the table read, "Choose what you need, not what you want." Eliot looked at the jars. He passed over forget-me-mint, reestroot, and longing lavender. His hand hovered over a jar labeled simply, "Hearth." The merchant nodded once. They took a pinch of the blend and dropped it into the waiting cup. Hot water was poured, though Eliot never saw the kettle, and the tea bloomed in the cup like a memory unfolding. Steam rose. He lifted the cup and sipped. The taste was not strong but familiar, a warmth that crept up slowly, like someone placing a blanket around his shoulders. Behind his eyes he saw it, a memory. Not sharp, but complete. A room filled with the sound of turning pages, the weight of a dog curled at his feet, and the quiet certainty that no one would knock, and nothing needed doing. He breathed out slowly. The merchant reached across the table and placed something in his hand. A tea bag wrapped in cloth. No label. No string. Just weight and warmth. For later, they said. It was the only thing they spoke. Eliot nodded, tucked the bundle into his pocket, and stepped back out into the silver light. The river was still frozen, but the path was clearer now, like steam on cold glass. Part 7, The Choir Beneath the Bridge. The road narrowed until it became more a suggestion than a path, just a stretch of packed snow leading through a narrow gorge of blue stone. Above, the sky dimmed into evening, the light turning quiet and indigo. Eliot walked slowly, the warmth of the tea merchant's gift still tucked close to his chest. The frozen river reappeared to his left, snaking beneath a low, arched bridge carved from weathered granite. He stopped at its base. There was music. Not loud, not near. It hummed from underneath the bridge, a slow, resonant harmony like the sound of 100 voices exhaling at once. The bridge seemed to hold its breath. Eliot stepped closer. A sign was pinned gently to a nearby tree. The choir beneath the bridge. Only the quiet are invited to sing. He didn't speak. He simply stepped beneath the arch. The space under the bridge was larger than expected, spacious, round like a cavern carved into memory. Small lanterns hung from the stone ceiling, glowing blue and gold. And seated in a circle were 7 figures, cloaked and still, each with a candle flickering in front of them. None turned to face him. But space had been left for one more. Eliot sat. In front of him, a candle sparked to life. The singing wasn't sound, not exactly, it was feeling. The hum in his bones, the warmth behind his eyes, the shape of a lullaby once sung to him long ago. And then, without thinking, Eliot breathed in and joined them. No lyrics. No melody. Just breath. And knowing. The choir didn't grow louder, but it deepened. A harmony of shared stillness. He closed his eyes. For a long time there was only warmth and breath and the memory of snow falling slowly just beyond reach. When he opened his eyes again, the other candles were dim. Only his remained. A folded note lay at its base. "You've remembered your quiet. Keep it close." He tucked the note into his journal. And when he stepped out from under the bridge, the wind greeted him like an old friend, too long gone. The road climbed now. The sky opened wider. And Eliot walked, softly humming a tune he couldn't remember learning. Part 8, The Post Office of Unsent Letters. The path rose gently through a stretch of open snowfield where every footstep echoed just a little, as if the ground had grown thinner and sound was trying to fall through it. Frost sparkled like old ink on a forgotten page. Up ahead stood a small building made of stone and wood, roof heavy with snow. A crooked weather vane turned slowly, not with the wind, but with hesitation. Over the door, carved into a lintel dusted in ice, were the words, "The Post Office of Unsent Letters." Eliot opened the door quietly. Inside was a hush that felt deliberate. Tall cubby shelves lined the walls, filled with letters, all sealed, all gently aged. Some were tucked into bundles with ribbon. Others sat alone, wrapped in quiet. At the center of the room stood a tall desk. Behind it, a woman with paper-colored hair and glasses that fogged lightly with every breath. She looked up as he entered and nodded in acknowledgement, her eyes kind. "Have you come to read one?" she asked, "or leave one?" Eliot thought for a moment. "Maybe both," he said. The woman gestured to a writing table. He sat, pulled a sheet of pale, soft paper toward him, and let his hand move. The words came slowly, not rushed, not clear, but they came. He didn't write to anyone. And yet the letter knew exactly who it was for. When he was finished, he folded it in half. There was no envelope, no stamp, just a small glass box beside the desk. He placed the letter inside. It disappeared with a sound like a page turning in a closed book. "Would you like one in return?" the woman asked. He nodded. She scanned a shelf near the back, then pulled a letter with a ribbon the color of early snow. She handed it to him without a word. Eliot opened it. Inside a single sentence, written in a hand that might have once been his own. "You did not fail them by leaving." He folded the note carefully and tucked it into the back of his journal, behind the candle paper from the bridge choir. The woman behind the desk smiled, not at him, but at the space he left behind as he stepped toward the door. Outside, the snowfall had returned, small flakes, slow and steady. The road curved to the right, disappearing over a hill that waited quietly. And Eliot followed, feeling just a little lighter, as if someone had answered a question he didn't realize he'd asked. Part 9, The House That Wasn't There Yesterday. The hill Eliot climbed was soft with wind-blown snow. No markers guided him, and yet he didn't feel lost. The path seemed to remember him now, pressing itself gently into place just a few steps ahead, as if it were making itself up along the way. At the top of the rise stood a small house. It hadn't been there the day before. In fact, it hadn't even existed a moment ago. But now it stood as if it had always belonged. A sign hung on the gatepost, hand-painted and slightly crooked. The house that wasn't there yesterday, but has always been waiting. Eliot stepped through the gate. The house was narrow, with a steep roof, moss on the stones, and windows lit with a soft amber glow. Smoke drifted from the chimney, and the door was already ajar, just enough to say, "We've been expecting you." He stepped inside. It was warm, not just in temperature, but in feeling. The scent of cinnamon, cedar, and something softer, like worn linen or the inside of a favorite book, floated in the air. The room was familiar. Painfully so. A couch he'd once napped on during a thunderstorm. A lamp that flickered, just like the one in his childhood reading corner. A window that framed the snow in exactly the way he remembered from his grandparents' house. It was a house built from memory, not copied, not mimicked, but gently gathered. And in the center of the room sat a fireplace, already lit, though no one had tended it. On the mantel sat 3 objects. A worn photograph, blurred but beloved. A small wooden box sealed with a ribbon. A key made of something that looked like glass but pulsed faintly with warmth. He picked up the photograph. He didn't recognize the faces, but he knew the feeling. Belonging, before and beyond words. He opened the wooden box. Inside a single earring, a page torn from a notebook, a dried flower, and a note that read, "Not everything that disappears is truly gone." He took the key last, tucking it into his coat pocket. The fireplace sighed. He sat for a while, long enough for the room to exhale, long enough for his heartbeat to slow. He didn't sleep, but he rested. When he stood again, the house gently closed behind him. He looked back only once. It was already gone, but his coat was warmer now. And the next stretch of road glowed faintly ahead, as if moonlight had decided to walk with him for a while. Part 10, the bookstore with only one customer. The moon had fully risen now, low and wide, casting the snow in soft gradients of silver and lavender. Eliot followed the light without question, the road now so familiar it felt like an old conversation. Around a bend, nestled beneath the boughs of a leaning pine, sat a small building made of black timber and pale stone. A weathered sign above the door creaked gently in the wind. Only reads, "A bookstore for one." The windows were fogged, but golden light pushed softly through, the kind that books seemed to glow in. Eliot stepped inside. The bell above the door gave no ring, but the room acknowledged him with warmth and scent, binding glue, old pages, dried chamomile. It was small, this bookstore. Shelves lined the walls in a kind of lopsided spiral. No titles on the spines, just symbols. Some shelves curved into staircases that led nowhere. Others dipped low to follow the shape of the floorboards. A desk stood near the back. Behind it, a short woman with a long braid and reading glasses perched on her forehead looked up and smiled. "You're on time," she said. I didn't know I had an appointment, Eliot replied. No one does, she said, motioning toward a small reading nook with a cushion shaped like a cloud. But the books know. She plucked one volume from a nearby shelf, midnight blue cover, no writing, and handed it to him. For this hour, he sat. The book opened itself to a page already creased with memory. And there on the page was a story. His story. Not everything, not in order, but small moments scattered like breadcrumbs. A child staring at snowfall through a fogged window. A boy holding a coat that was too big for him, refusing to let go. A young man standing on a bridge, unsure if the world still had room for him. And then most recently, a traveler walking toward something he couldn't name, watched only by the snow. He turned the page. Blank. And yet, it felt full. The shopkeeper nodded from behind her desk. That part hasn't happened yet. He closed the book carefully and returned it. Do you want to write something before you leave? She asked, gesturing to a blank journal on a pedestal. Eliot thought for a moment, then took the offered pen. He wrote 5 words. I came, I kept walking. The page shimmered once, then settled. He turned to leave, but the shopkeeper handed him a small package, wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. For your next chapter, she said. He didn't open it. He just smiled. Outside, the night was calm, and the road ahead felt newly written, curving softly between trees that now looked a little like shelves. Part 11, The Street of Forgotten Voices. The road curved down into a narrow hollow where the wind moved a little slower, as though it were pausing between words. The snow thickened here, rising in soft banks along either side of a cobbled street half swallowed by time. Eliot followed it, his footsteps muffled. The buildings that lined the way were uneven, built of stone and slate and timber, with crooked shutters and stooped roofs. Some leaned into each other, as though sharing secrets they couldn't remember clearly. A small sign, faded and frostbitten, hung from a lamp-post. The Street of Forgotten Voices. Every voice still echoes somewhere. The silence here was rich, not empty but layered. Eliot stopped beside a narrow doorway where wind chimes hung, unmoving. A plaque beside the door read, To those who never finished their sentence. He moved on. Around the corner, a stoop with a bench invited him to sit. Beside it, a wooden box like an old postal slot waited quietly. Above it, carved into a panel, If you've ever wanted to say it, you still can. Eliot sat. The package from the bookstore rested in his lap. He didn't open it yet. Instead, he reached into his coat and withdrew the blank journal he'd carried since the start of the road. Its pages were still mostly empty, though smudged now at the corners, worn at the spine. He flipped to a clean page and wrote without planning. The words came slow but steady. Not a confession, not an apology, something simpler. I missed you longer than I thought I would, but I learned to carry that gently. He folded the page, tore it cleanly from the spine, and placed it in the wooden box. It didn't vanish. It didn't glow. It simply stayed. A voice, neither male nor female, young nor old, spoke softly behind him. You're not the only one who needed to say it. Eliot turned. No one was there. Just the bench, the chimes, the hush of snowfall. And then he noticed the wind had picked up slightly, and the chimes were moving now, not ringing, but whispering. Not words, but comfort. He stood, tucked the journal back into his coat, and walked on. At the end of the street stood an archway, carved from worn stone. A single word above it, Listen. As Eliot passed beneath it, he heard them, quiet voices rising like fog from the snow. A mother humming in the next room. A friend laughing during a walk long past. His own voice, reading to no one in particular. None called him back. They simply stayed. Soft echoes of a life still gently unfolding. The road ahead opened again, and he kept walking. Part 12, The Window That Watches Back. Eliot's path now rose gently out of the hollow and onto higher ground, where the trees thinned and the wind moved with more freedom. The snow here was smoother, less layered, as though fewer had passed this way, or perhaps none had needed to. Ahead, a structure stood by itself. A tall wooden frame, upright, empty of walls or roof. In its center was a single window. It had no building around it, no house it belonged to. Just the frame and the pane, glass held in oak, standing solitary on a low rise of snow. A wooden sign staked beside it read, "The window that watches back. Look gently." Eliot approached slowly. The glass was faintly frosted, but clear enough to see through. And so he looked. At first he saw the path behind him, the winding road, the softened villages, the moments folded into the journey. But then the image shifted, and he saw himself, not as others saw him, but as the road had seen him. The man who stopped to listen. The one who left something behind, then walked lighter. The voice among voices beneath a bridge. The letter writer who never asked for a reply. Eliot saw the whole of him, not remarkable, not grand, just true. There was no shame in the reflection, no vanity, just presence. And then the image shifted one more time. Now he saw the road ahead, but not the landscape. He saw only a light. Soft, not distant, not final, just steady. The kind of light you follow when you're no longer looking for answers, only companionship. As he stepped back from the window, the frost on the glass shimmered and bloomed outward, sealing it over until nothing could be seen again. The window had watched, and now it rested. At the base of the wooden frame, something waited. A small box with a silver hinge. Eliot opened it. Inside, a fragment of mirror, no larger than his thumb, shaped like a raindrop. He tucked it into the cloth wrap with the tea merchant's gift and held it close. Not everything needed to be understood to be kept. The wind pressed gently at his back, and he turned toward the waiting road. The snow swirled softly, and he walked on. Part 13, The Lantern Orchard. The road narrowed into a path flanked by wooden posts, each topped with a small candle lantern, most unlit. Eliot followed them uphill, where a cluster of trees emerged, short and round and dusted in snow. Their branches were bare of leaves, but heavy with lanterns, hundreds of them dangling from every limb like glowing fruit. Some flickered dimly, others pulsed warmly. A few barely held their light at all. A hand-painted wooden sign leaned against a nearby stump. The Lantern Orchard. Light only what you remember gently. Eliot passed between the trees slowly. The lanterns swayed as if in breath, and as he moved, some flared for a moment, responding to a presence not quite memory, not quite dream. He paused beneath a tree with narrow branches and low-hanging limbs. A small lantern near his shoulder flared softly and began to glow. Inside its glass was a faint image. A quiet dinner from years ago, filled with unsaid things but comfort all the same. A hand passed bread. A laugh shared after too long a silence. The image faded. Another lantern lit farther down the branch. Inside, a rainy day spent reading beside someone no longer present, their arm brushing his just once, the warmth echoing far longer. Eliot felt no ache, just a soft weight in his chest. He continued through the orchard, more lanterns blooming gently as he passed. Some lit only briefly, some never lit at all, but none were dark in anger. They were simply sleeping. At the far edge of the orchard, a tree stood alone. It held a single lantern, dim and cold. Beneath it was a wooden box with a slotted lid. A note pinned to the front read, "If you are ready to forgive something, place the thought here." Eliot stood for a long time. Then he reached into his pocket and removed a crumpled slip of paper, the first page of the journal he'd torn back in the village of forgotten voices. He didn't read it again. He simply folded it twice more and slid it into the slot. The lantern above didn't light, but the air shifted. Lighter, less waiting. He turned to go. As he passed back through the trees, one last lantern blinked to life behind him. Inside, a view of the snow-covered road and Eliot walking it. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. The light followed him, quietly. Part 14, the hourglass stair. The path curved sharply and began to rise. Snow drifted steadily now, no longer falling in flakes, but in soft ribbons that wrapped the air in near silence. The trees grew sparse, then disappeared entirely, replaced by stone steps rising from the snow like a frozen spine. Each step was wide, dusted with frost, and shaped slightly different from the last, as though each one had been carved not by a mason, but by memory itself. At the base of the staircase, a weathered stone tablet had been gently cleared of snow by the wind. Etched into it were the words, "The hourglass stair. The more you climb, the slower it gets." Eliot placed his foot on the first step. Time did not stop. But it changed. Each step forward stretched the moment slightly. The air between breaths grew longer. The wind slowed to a hush. Even his thoughts became more drawn out, like echoes floating through fog. Halfway up, he paused, not from tiredness, but from stillness. Here the snow did not fall. It hovered, each flake suspended midair like a note held in song. Eliot looked over his shoulder. The world below was still visible, every village, every figure, every turn in the road. Not as they were, but as he remembered them. The clocksmith's garden glowed gently at the edge of the forest. The choir's candles flickered like distant stars beneath the bridge. The town of Nearly shimmered with soft, maybe light. They weren't behind him. They were within him. He took another step. And another. The top of the stair came slowly, like the ending of a long sentence you don't want to finish too quickly. When he reached it, he found a small bench carved into the final platform. A single hourglass rested there, sitting upright and untouched. But the sand inside flowed upward, slowly rising from the bottom into the top. A brass plate beneath it read, "Borrowed time. Please return when finished." Eliot watched the hourglass for a while, then placed a hand over it gently. It stilled. Not stopped, just understood. He left it there exactly as he'd found it. The staircase behind him shimmered slightly in the snowlight, half real now, as if it might fold away once he left its memory. Ahead the path resumed, now dusted in moonlight rather than snow. The air felt deeper, quieter, ready, and Eliot walked forward, the shape of time shifting behind him like a tide returning home. Part 15, the house without corners. Beyond the hourglass stair, the snow lightened and the wind stilled, as though the world itself had taken a long, slow breath. The path became smooth beneath Eliot's feet, not paved, but worn, like a trail walked gently over centuries. Ahead, nestled at the foot of a long, sloping hill, was a house. It was simple, one story, painted a soft gray-blue that faded into the snowy landscape. But something about it was unusual. It had no corners. Every wall curved softly into the next. The roof was domed, the windows rounded, and the door was an elegant oval with no knob. A small wooden sign beside the door read, "The house without corners. Everything fits here, even you." Eliot stepped inside. Warmth met him instantly, not from a fire but from the way the space welcomed him. There were cushions piled against the walls, shelves filled with books that had no titles, and a low table set with a tea tray, steam curling from the spout. No one greeted him, and yet the room felt alive with presence. He sat on one of the cushions. The walls curved gently around him, like arms not quite touching but always ready to. He picked up a book. Inside there were no stories, just lines. You stayed even when it was easier to leave. This sorrow is not a flaw. It is a room you haven't finished sitting in. You have always belonged, even when no one said so. The words weren't directed at him, but they were meant for him. Eliot leaned back. He didn't doze, but time softened again, rounding itself like the room, until minutes and hours became the same soft thing. Eventually he stood. As he moved toward the door, he noticed a mirror hanging beside it. Not large, not ornate. It showed him. Just him. As he was. And the reflection smiled. Not a wide grin, not a knowing smirk. just the quiet smile of someone who had waited a long time and was glad you finally made it. He stepped back out into the evening. The snow had nearly stopped. The sky was wide, and the hill beyond the house rose slowly towards something Eliot could not yet see, but could feel. The end of the road was near, and it was waiting with patience, not urgency. He walked on. Part 16, The Meadow of Still Names. The hill rose gradually beneath Eliot's feet, not steep, but steady. Each step forward met with the softest resistance, as though the earth was gently asking, "Are you sure you're ready?" He was. At the top, the world opened. A vast meadow stretched before him, blanketed in pale snow. The moon hung low and full above, its light so quiet it barely cast shadows. The air was hushed, not in emptiness but in reverence. No buildings, no trees, just the snow and the names. They appeared not carved, not etched, but grown from the snow itself. As Eliot walked slowly between them, he read. Celia, who always left the light on. Jonas, who forgave first. Wren, who carried quiet better than most. Eliot, who kept walking. He paused at the last one. The letters were not large, not bold, but they were whole. A wooden bench sat nearby, facing east, where the edge of the meadow faded into mist. He sat. For a long while there was only breath, and snow, and silence. Then he noticed it. A shape approaching from the mist. Slow, deliberate, and gentle. Not threatening. It was a figure, dressed in long robes of winter gray, face hidden beneath a hood. As they neared, they stopped a few paces away. They spoke, not in volume, but in presence. You've walked far. Eliot nodded. Yes. You've remembered more than you forgot. I think so. The figure gestured to the meadow. This place holds what has been witnessed. Eliot looked around. All of it? No, only what was carried with care. The figure reached into their robe and removed a mirror. It was small, oval, framed in wood, with a soft crack running down one side. They held it out. Eliot took it. Inside, his reflection didn't look back. Instead, the mirror showed a fire still burning in the inn with only one room. The choir beneath the bridge, one candle newly lit. A new letter arriving in the post office's box. A lantern in the orchard glowing quietly, not for memory, but for now. He looked up. The figure was already gone, their place marked only by a small drift of undisturbed snow. The mist at the far edge of the meadow began to part, revealing a narrow archway shaped like an eye gently closed. Above it, the faint outline of a symbol Eliot had seen before. A mirror. A road. A person walking. He stood, the small mirror still warm in his hand. And he walked once more toward the archway that waited, not as an ending, but as a turning page. Part 17, The Mirror at the End of the Road. The archway did not open like a door. It simply allowed him through. As Eliot stepped beneath it, the snow beneath his feet faded, not melted, not vanished, just ceased like a memory fully accepted. The air grew warmer by degrees, not hot, not bright, but softly still. The space he entered was neither room nor landscape. It was shaped like a breath held between thoughts. At the center of this space stood a mirror. Tall, simple. Its frame made of smooth, worn wood, the kind that's been handled by time, by hands, by stories too quiet to be told aloud. There were no words on the frame. No sign to explain it. This was the mirror. The mirror. Eliot approached. The glass was unlike any he had seen before. Not perfectly clear, almost misted as if it reflected not just light but memory, time, quiet. He expected to see himself, but the mirror did not show him. Not right away. Instead, it showed the road. All of it. The first step through snow. The villages. The silent figures. The lanterns. The voices that never shouted, yet never faded. The letters never sent, but always meant. Every place. Every moment. reflected not as they had been, but as they had lived within him. And then, slowly, the image shifted, and he saw himself, but not from the outside. He saw the weight he had carried and the care with which he had carried it. He saw the absences he had named and the presence he had become. He saw every self he had met along the road, possible, forgotten nearlys and not yets, all gathered, all silent, all still. Watching, not judging, simply there, waiting for him to see them. And when he did, the mirror changed once more. Now it was just a mirror. And he was just Eliot, whole. He reached out and touched the glass. It was warm. It shimmered once like snow under starlight. And then the glass dissolved. Not broken. Not vanished. Simply gone. In its place stood a path, new, clean, no longer dusted in memory, lit softly by lanterns made from every moment he had lived. The past didn't disappear. It walked with him now, in quiet footsteps beside his own. He took one breath and stepped forward. Part 18, the hearth at the edge of the map. The new path wound gently, neither rising nor falling, just continuing. Eliot no longer searched the road for meaning. He didn't need to. Every step now was a conversation with the quiet, a nod to the space around him. The snow had faded to mist, the trees now distant. Ahead, nestled in a hollow where time seemed paused, sat a small cottage. Smoke lifted from a chimney with no urgency. A hand-painted sign hung by the gate, the hearth at the edge of the map. Here even stories sleep. Eliot stepped inside. The cottage door creaked only slightly. A fire already burned in the hearth, casting soft shadows across a room filled with cushions, blankets, and shelves, filled with nothing but air and rest. A kettle whispered on the stove. There was no one here, and yet nothing felt missing. He sat by the fire. For a long while he didn't move. The mirror from the meadow rested in his pocket, still warm. The tea bundle, long carried, remained unopened, its comfort not in use, but in presence. He placed them on the table beside him. No decision. Just acknowledgement. The fire didn't grow or shrink. It simply stayed. Eliot closed his eyes, and for the first time in a very long while, he slept. Part 19, the silent visitor. When Eliot woke, the light in the cottage had shifted. The kind of light that comes with early dawn, though no window revealed the sky. The fire still glowed softly, as if it had been waiting without expectation. He sat up slowly. Across from him, in a low chair by the hearth, sat someone. They hadn't been there before, and yet it did not feel strange. The figure was cloaked in soft gray wool, the kind worn by the quietest kind of traveler. Their hands were folded in their lap, and their face, while calm, held no distinct features Eliot could name, just the unmistakable feeling of familiarity. They said nothing, and Eliot didn't speak either, but in the stillness something passed between them. A memory not his, but gently offered. A sorrow he hadn't realized he'd carried. A kindness he'd given without noticing. A version of himself not different, just remembered. The visitor reached into their cloak and withdrew a small item, round, pale, wrapped in linen. They set it beside the tea bundle Eliot had placed there before. It was a second bundle, unmarked, but Eliot somehow knew this one wasn't meant to be carried. It was meant to be given. The visitor stood, their motion as smooth as mist rising from warm stone. No words, no farewell. They walked to the door, opened it, and disappeared into the waiting light. Eliot sat a little longer. Then he reached for the second bundle and placed it in his coat pocket. Not as a keepsake, but as a promise. Part 20, the gift returned. Eliot stepped outside the cottage. The world had changed again, gently, slowly, like a breath drawn in rather than a page turned. The snow had melted here, leaving behind soft moss and pale cobblestones that formed no road but simply invitation. There was no wind, just the hush of a world at peace with itself. Ahead, a small well stood beneath a weeping tree, its branches trailing like silver threads. A wooden plaque had been set gently against the well's stone. "Leave what you never meant to keep." Eliot approached with slow steps, his coat rustling like memory. He reached into his pocket and drew out the second bundle, the one left by the silent visitor. It felt warm but not heavy. Inside, he knew, was something he'd never asked for and never expected, but that had belonged to him just the same. He knelt, unwrapped the cloth. Inside was a stone, ordinary in shape, but carved with a single word. "Still." He ran his fingers over it once. Then, without sadness, he placed it gently at the edge of the well. The water didn't ripple. The tree didn't sway. But something shifted, within the weight of old, invisible burdens quietly lifting from his shoulders, no longer needing to be named to be gone. He stood. Behind him, the cottage's chimney no longer smoked. Its fire had rested. And now so had he. Part 21, The Gentle Goodbye. The path beyond the well was barely a path at all, just a line of pressed grass leading between low hills, glowing faintly as if lit by the memory of moonlight. Eliot followed it, not because he had to, but because it felt right. The world was so quiet now. Not hollow. Not final. Just ready. At the crest of the hill, he saw them. All of them. Figures from the road. The clocksmith, gently turning the key in his brass instrument. The merchant from the riverside tent, now sipping their own cup of tea. The woman from the bookstore, waving from behind an invisible counter. Even the bench from the village of forgotten voices seemed to be there, with no one sitting on it, because no one needed to. They didn't speak. They simply stood together on either side of the path, as witnesses, as keepers, as pieces of the journey now complete. Eliot passed between them with a soft nod. Each face, some familiar, some barely remembered, reflected not just who he had met, but who he had become by meeting them. At the end of the procession stood a mirror. But this one didn't reflect. It glowed, a soft silvery shimmer like snow catching dawn. As Eliot approached, the figures behind him faded, not disappeared, not lost. Simply returned. He placed his hand on the glowing surface. No sensation. Just peace. The mirror pulsed once, then opened like mist parting from a warm lake. He stepped forward, not toward the end, but through the last moment of goodbye. Part 22, The Road That Begins Again. On the other side of the mirror, there was light. Not bright, not dazzling, but whole. The kind of light that lives at the edge of morning, where everything still feels possible and nothing has yet asked to be named. Eliot stepped into it. The snow was gone now, melted into dew that clung to soft earth and early green. Trees bowed gently as he passed, not with weight, but with welcome. Somewhere nearby, water moved, a stream or a brook, or time itself finding a quieter rhythm. There was a road ahead. New. Unmarked. But familiar. It curved not with memory, but with invitation. Eliot didn't carry the mirror anymore. He didn't need to. Its warmth had stayed within him, tucked gently into the spaces where silence once lived. The bell on his coat had long gone quiet. But that too was peace, not loss. As he walked, he noticed something in the distance. Another figure, seated at a crossroads beneath a tree, writing in a small leather-bound book. They looked up and smiled, not because they knew him, but because they would. He passed them without words. But in that moment, the new road ahead opened a little more. And Eliot, once traveler, now keeper of stillness, continued forward. Not searching, not returning, simply beginning again. Thank you for joining us on this quiet journey. As Eliot walked the snow-covered road, perhaps a piece of you walked with him, past the nearlies, the lanterns, the silences, and into something softer, something remembered. If this story brought you comfort, feel free to stay a little longer. Let the stillness settle, Let the road gently fade behind your closed eyes. And when you're ready to return, we'll be here, with another story, another road, and another night's rest. Until then, sleep well, traveler, and may your dreams